So today is April 10th, 2021, and today, as April 8th, is celebrated as the Buddha's birthday. We're having our one-day Zazen Kai in honor of the Buddha's birth this morning, and the Teisho will be taking a look at the Buddha's birth and how it functions in our practice. So we'll begin with the story itself in a kind of summarized form. So just so you remember the myth. The Bodhisattva, after completing countless lifetimes in various Jataka practices or Jataka lives, actualizing the paramitas and deepening insight and compassion, he's now residing in the Tushita heavens. And he reflects there that after countless lifetimes of effort, he is indeed ready. He will be born one last time on this earth, and that in that life, he will become a fully realized Buddha, able to open the way for the good of all sentient beings. Queen Maya, his mother-to-be, a couple of Vastu, had a marvelous dream. She dreamed that a six-tusked white elephant touched her right side with a lotus flower. And she awoke in great joy. The king, King Suddhodana, went to his wise men, and they said the dream meant that a child with the potential to become either a world ruler or a Buddha would be born to them. If in this coming life he should see the signs of impermanence, he will renounce worldly life and dedicate himself to realizing perfect enlightenment. If the signs do not appear to him, then he would rise to the position of world ruler. The king was overjoyed and he was troubled. He wanted his son to be an emperor of the world, that is to follow his path and be a ruler, and an even greater one than he himself. That's what he wanted to see happen. So he had some problems. Now, near the end of her pregnancy, the queen went to visit her parents, which was a tradition of the time. And on the way, she stopped with her retinue in the beautiful Lumbini gardens. When she stood beneath a sala tree, blossoms began to tumble from the sky. The air seemed to be, was, in the legend, filled with the scent of incense and roses. Beautiful voices were singing in a language of delight. Emerging painlessly out of his mother's right side, the baby Buddha was born. He took 7 steps, lotus flowers opening beneath his feet. Devas descending from higher realms poured heavenly ambrosia over him, washing away any earthly birth impurities. Then raising one hand toward the heavens and pointing the other down toward the earth, he sounded the Buddha's lion's roar, proclaiming, above the heavens, below the heavens, I alone, the honored one. In this life, I shall be Buddha. All beings, even those suffering from illness or anguish, experienced a moment of deep freedom, happiness, and peace. Prisoners, captives, and exiles found release. Hell's fires ceased to burn. Hungry ghosts were satisfied. Animals freed of fear, and warring spirits at ease. A moment of happiness suffused all the earth. But no one was happier than the Queen Maya, seeing her long-awaited child at last, unless it was the newborn Buddha-to-be, who already looked upon each deva, each person, each animal, tree, flower, and stone, each mountain and river, even as a mother regards her own loved and only child. So he came with a vast mind, is the legend. So this is the essence of the Buddhist traditional legend of his birth, Buddhist tradition's legend of the Buddha's birth. And it's clearly using a language of myth to point beyond the literal. The birth of any child is ordinary, and it is a miracle. How do 2 microscopic cells become one living person? How do gastrula and blastula become a being with talents, interests, unique features, and personality? Where does a child come from? As with the Buddha's birth, the birth of each child affects us all, whether we know it or not. Myth gives imaginative space to the reality of the uncanny, real, ungraspable, ordinary reality we are all living right now. Still, babies don't talk, not in literal language. So the baby Buddha's profound utterance can't be taken literally and cannot be held to as a matter of faith or belief. Fundamentalism's reductive literalization of myth takes us down a narrow and rigid road. So far, thank goodness, no Buddhist sects have sprung up arguing over what the baby Buddha said. Let's hope they never do. Still, not knowing how to use our own minds, we humans have proven ourselves capable of believing in endless stupidities, as we've seen right here in these first decades of the 21st century. For sadly, we keep clinging to untruths. The somewhat good news is that the destructive consequences of such stories are becoming too obvious. Zen begins with some degree of recognizing that our current story is inadequate. Roshi Kapleau used to say that to practice, we need only one belief, that 2,500 years ago, the Buddha was not a fool or a liar when he spontaneously exclaimed upon his great enlightenment, wonder of wonders, all beings are Buddhas already, fully endowed with all wisdom and virtue. Only their self-centered delusions prevent them from realizing it. If we fail to recognize that the point of practice is not simply veneration, but realization of this, ourselves, we become stuck with belief. Practice is an opportunity to mature beyond belief. It is the way of the bodhisattva, of the wisdom being, the growing up being who is maturing beyond habitual self-centeredness. When literalized belief overwhelms practice, we get the dregs, that is dogma, and with it, the toxicity of inquisitions and holy wars. Fortunately, the baby Buddha's legendary words and actions are pointers, not endpoints. The road to our own above the heavens, below the heavens, is not one of only nice feelings or nice beliefs. The path of practice realization demands we face our own stuck places, see through the wall or veil of everything not realization, not original mind, everything that intrudes between us and this raindrop, this snowflake, this peach blossom, this pain in the knee. Because of this reality of the work involved, walking the path can arouse feelings of anxiety, discomfort, fear, despair, even terror. Yet in the end, if we stick with it, breathe into it, stay with this breath, this count, this koan, and despite all temptations to turn away, we keep grinning back into the eyes of the grinning skull staring at us, we will eventually, which means suddenly, find our own intimacy with above the heavens, below the heavens. Harada Tongan Roshi, who you may know as Tongan-san in the Three Pillars of Zen, said, I cannot stress enough to you the absolute importance of sticking to your practice no matter what. No adjustment is required. No calculation is needed. I went through the same thing that you are going through now, so I can tell you from personal experience what you must do. You must give your life to this. and refuse to let anything, any thoughts, ideas, attitudes get in your way. Your yes must be open. Your resolve must be like steel. Why? Why do this? In the so-called relative world, things are understood in relation to one another. That's what relative means. But when me in here, you out there falls away, when duality drops from us like a cloak, things are seen at last as themselves without comparison, which means not relatively. When the relative world is momentarily gone, how can there be high and low, up and down, big or little? That only exists when one thing is seen as in comparison to another. But what if, well, when, let's say, when that falls away, then the mountain is just this mountain. This hill is just this hill. The river is just this river. Each thing is overwhelmingly itself. The veins of this leaf, the edge of this stone, this whirl of dust, the head of this nail sticking up out of this worn plank. What is there to compare any of them to? The anxieties we may experience on the way can be good signs, indications that we're approaching something more than what we're used to, something vivid and real with less us involved. This transition from my child to my child, my tree to my tree, can cause anxiety. Anxiety is one of the figures guarding the entrance to the temple. Breathe into the anxiety. Again, grin back at the grinning skull of impermanence and separation facing you, and pass right through. Of course, if the intensity is too much, working for a time with a therapist with some knowledge of meditation can prove useful in lowering a sense of threat. Aiken Roshi had no qualms about recommending this. But again, why? We're not just sitting to calm our minds, helpful and healing as that might be. A prison break takes steadiness, nerve, effort, thought, guts. The path of practice realization can be like a stroll in warm sunlight after a long winter, but it can also be like a dragon with a battle with dragons in a labyrinth edged with thorns. And that too can be okay. There's something exhilarating and satisfying in a challenge that demands our all, something that the mere calm of genteel belief, even good Buddhist belief, can't touch. How do we step beyond? How do we step into what has always been and realize, even claim it as our own? This is the truth of the Buddha. This is when above the heavens, below the heavens says it all. There is a way, and the secret of that way is persistence, dedicated practice. Even when it seems dull, fruitless, and barren, persist, persist. To turn to Aitken again, if practice becomes so dull as to become distasteful, we need not just push on. When I say persist, it doesn't mean ignore your condition. If practice really becomes dull, Aitken Roshi recommends we stop, put fresh flowers on the altar, do some inspiring reading, look at a Buddha or Bodhisattva we find inspiring, straighten up the Zazen space, the room or place that we do Zazen in. These things are ways of persisting, and we'll soon find, typically we'll find, energy returning. Kapla Roshi recommending taking moments when that happens to remember that life passes quickly and that time waits for no one, and to recall why you began Zen practice in the first place. This too is persisting. Also, if you're tired, Splash cold water on wrists, face, and neck. And finally, instead of facing a wall in Zazen, if this is what's happening, this sense of dead or barren practice, sit facing an inspiring Buddha or Bodhisattva, even putting up a scan of a photograph of a figure you find really inspiring. And when you sit, sit without strain. So both teachers really recommend, in persisting, rebooting your essential vows for the benefit of all, and then finding ways back to the really core of what you're about. Fairy tales say that we must eat 7 iron loaves and wear out 7 pairs of iron shoes before we do find our way to the fulfilling ending that awaits. Those are fairy tale images that go very much to the heart of what persistence means. How do you wear out 7 pairs of iron shoes? How do you eat 7 iron loaves of bread? And yet you do, and you must. The legendary words, let me just continue. The persistence is the essence of the hero and heroine's journey. In our case, persistence rests on a faith that the Buddha wasn't a fool or a liar. That's where the energy for persistence comes from. It also comes from faith in oneself. Faith that when the Buddha said all beings, that includes you. All beings have this intrinsic, original mind, unstained, pure, completely in touch, not even a speck of dust of separation at all. Our original nature, totally unself-centered, totally present. Faith in your real self. The legendary words of the baby Buddha, above the heavens, below the heavens, I alone, the only one, or the honored one, can of course be badly misunderstood as extreme egotism or narcissism, but that's not what it is at all. These words express absolute humility, absolute selflessness. Through them, original enlightenment, the original condition right now of our own minds, yours and mine, are given a voice above the heavens, below the heavens, I alone, the only one. But knowing the words is not yet singing the tune. And though the Buddha proclaimed this at the very beginning, he still had to grow up into an ordinary, bewildered adult, become heartsick through his own experience of old age, sickness, and death, and then work and struggle in order to become fully conscious, fully realize what he already fully understood at birth before a single thought arose. Are we any different? This is our own life, our own reality being expressed. This is the language of myth, giving you the reality of your own mind this very moment, right now, as you listen. Who hears the words? Who understands? Now, there's a Jewish legend you might know that says, in the womb, every one of us, all beings, all babies in the womb, already know all the truth. All truth, all wisdom is already there with each, in the mind of each infant unborn in the womb. But at birth, an angel touches a child's upper lip, leaving that little indentation right there. And with that touch, the child forgets it all. So our life then is the work of remembering what we once already knew. Only this time, in that remembering, to make it real and to function from it. to really become mature. That's the challenge of every life. Ikkyu wrote, the great iconoclast, when I tried to remember, I always forgot. Once I forgot, I never forget. When I tried to remember, I always forgot. Once I forgot, I never forget. This is so-called right recollection in a nutshell. With the preoccupied self forgotten, all we've been seeking is already found. When the self-centered self is forgotten, gone, gone, entirely gone, everything we've been seeking is already there and fully found. We don't have to add it to ourselves piece by piece. This piece called wisdom, this piece called integrity, this piece called compassion, and so on. With self-centeredness dropped away, we are home. It is a great relief, the great relief. No other relief compares to it. The last lines of The Lord of the Rings touch us deeply. Sam returns from seeing Frodo and Gandalf off from Middle-earth at the Grey Havens. And the last lines are, and he went on, and there was a yellow light and a fire within, and the evening meal was ready, and he was expected. And Rose drew him in and set him in his chair and put little Eleanor upon his lap. He drew a breath. Well, I'm back, he said. Well, I'm back. In short, the point of the journey is not to end up in some esoteric place, but to come home. Yet the Buddhist birth is a mystery, and presenting it as something miraculous has its truth. Where does a person who is the first to do something that's never been done, someone whose efforts ultimately influence millions of lives for the good, come from? Where does such a person come from? Buddhist tradition says also that there have been previous Buddhas, that is, fully enlightened, fully realized people in previous world ages on this very earth. Zen's ancestral line, when we'll chant this afternoon, I believe, in the ceremony for the baby Buddha, the Buddhist birth, goes back 7 past Buddhas, all of whom were taught by Manjushri Bodhisattva, Bodhisattva of non-dual prajna wisdom. Now, just to take a second, if we look at this legend as a language, the 7 past Buddhas, all taught by Manjushri, then we could say that it says simply, in the language of myth, that Buddhas arise out of absolute equality. Compassion arises out of an experience of emptiness. Manjushri is absolute equality, absolute emptiness. He's the teacher of the past 7 Buddhas. Do you see how the language of myth works? It's saying the all Buddhas arise out of absolute equality. And compassion itself arises out of the experience of emptiness, which is wisdom. Buddhist tradition says that the Buddhist birth, that is the birth of the child Siddhartha Gautama, was the first time in our world cycle that complete realization refound its voice. The baby Buddha, after proclaiming selfless truth, lapsed back into infancy, speaking only in smiles, tears, gurgles, laughs, and coos. In time, he grew up to be a prince who, seeing signs of impermanence, an old person, a sick person, a dead person, and a truth seeker, gave up his throne and set off into the wilderness, the wilds, to fulfill a deeper calling. In his enlightenment, the deepest realization, all potential powers of the mind for wisdom and compassion were, tradition holds, opened and fulfilled. Amazingly, he did this on his own, with no guide, no teacher or sangha. He did have some initial teachers, of course, but he moved past them. Their realizations did not solve the problem of old age, sickness, death. Maybe they were more about calming the mind or visionary experience, deeper intuition and such, but not the complete experience. Amazingly, he did this on his own with no teacher, sangha, guide. His effort arose out of a determination to benefit all beings. It arose out of the conviction that there was something more, something beyond the senses and intellect, yet not separate from them. It arose out of dedication to the reality, not just the possibility of awakening. It arose out of dismay and disillusionment, and out of the pain caused by errors and failures. And it arose out of the outcome of lifetimes of his own past efforts, as told of in the Jataka tales. This is the meaning of aspiration in Zen. This is the foundation of persistence. Deep determination to realize our own nature. What could be more natural? How can we go around not knowing our own nature? It seems impossible, delusional. And this is our ordinary experience that we take so for granted, accept as habit, as so. But there is more. And the Buddha was determined to awake to it. Knowing from our own practice how hard it is to even catch a glimpse of actual realization. Prince Siddhartha's determination to accomplish the entire path alone is not only extraordinary, but it is miraculous. His birth itself is cause for celebration, marking as it does the entrance of awakened mind into our own historic time period. A tremendous amount of hard work, a lifetime of demanding work was needed before what was already fully in place, before it could become mature. It was simply, it's just how things are, simply so. There it was already above the heavens, below the heavens, and yet so much work was needed to put that in place, and so much work remained to really function from this fully. The essence is established with above the heavens, below the heavens, which each of us also proclaimed at birth with our own distinctive lion's roar. And while ours may have sounded more like a cat's meow than any kind of a lion's roar, our intention with that ordinary wah was exactly the same. And then for us, as for him, the work of making it real began step by step. Failure and forgetting and remembering and resuming over and over. In daily Zazen, a real baby Buddha is born again. When we do Zazen sincerely, letting go of our habitual approach to being ourselves, letting go of our habitually self-centered thought processes, seeing beyond them, not trying to repress them or stop them, but seeing right through that arising greed, anger, and ignorance rise endlessly. I vow to abandon them. This is how a baby Buddha gets born, for real. Letting that all go, a baby Buddha gets born. Above the heavens, below the heavens, however, is not simply an Eastern thing. This is a way of stating the truth itself, The 17th century English Christian theologian and mystic Thomas Traherne wrote it was his Centuries of Meditation, it was an oddest story. The manuscript or the text of this handwritten work from the 17th century was found in a bookstall, I think hundreds of years later. It had never been published and never read. It turns out to be one of the great classics of spiritual literature worldwide. And in the 3rd century, Traherne wrote this. So if you think above the heavens, below the heavens, well, that's the Buddha. The Buddha is one's own nature. And so it's not limited at all. So here's what Traherne wrote in England in the 17th century. The corn was orient and immortal wheat, which never should be reaped, nor was ever sown. I thought it had stood from everlasting to everlasting. He's talking about when he was a child. The dust and stones of the street were as precious as gold. The gates were at first the end of the world. The green trees, when I saw them first through one of the gates, transported and ravished me. Their sweetness and unusual beauty made my heart to leap, and almost mad with ecstasy. They were such strange and wonderful things. The men, oh, what venerable and reverent creatures did the aged seem, immortal cherubims, and young men, glittering and sparkling angels, and maids, strange, seraphic pieces of life and beauty, boys and girls tumbling in the street and playing, were moving jewels. I knew not that they were born or should die, but all things abided eternally as they were in their proper places. Eternity was manifest in the light of the day, and something infinite beyond everything appeared, which talked with my expectation and moved my desire. The city seemed to stand in Eden or to be built in heaven. The streets were mine. The temple was mine. The people were mine. The clothes and gold and silver were mine, as much as their sparkling eyes, fair skins, and ruddy faces. The skies were mine, and so were the sun and moon and stars, and all the world was mine, and I the only spectator and enjoyer of it. I knew no churlish properties, nor bounds, nor divisions, but all properties and divisions were mine, all treasures and the possessors of them, so that with much ado, I was corrupted and made to learn the dirty devices of this world, which now I unlearn and become, as it were, a little child again. For us and for millions of others, the Buddha's birth 2,500 years ago opened the gate. He gave not just words, but offered a practice by which we can each confirm the reality of all such stunning words. So today we take a little time out of our busy schedules to honor Shakyamuni Buddha and his ceaseless efforts. We're grateful for the possibilities his exertions open to us. But before we are awash in sentimentality, here's Zen Master Yun Men. And this is a quote from John Wu's Golden Age of Zen about the teachers of the Tong. Yun Men related the legend of the Buddha. Immediately after his birth, with one hand pointing to heaven and the other pointing to earth, walked around in 7 steps, looked up at the 4 quarters and declared, above the heavens and below the heavens, I alone am the honored one. After relating the story, Yun Men said, if I were a witness of this scene, I would have knocked him to death at a single stroke and given his flesh to dogs for food. This would have been some contribution to the peace and harmony of the world. Roshi Kapleau loved that quote. This is Bodhidharma's I don't know in action. No understanding, no clinging to a mythos just it, absolutely. Just this incense smell, just this carpet so green, just this pain in the knee. We don't need fantastic legends and images. When we rip up, throw away, devour our gilded iconographies, we find that the Buddha was a person who, deeply troubled by impermanence and deeply aspiring to be of benefit to all, put his life on the line to realize truth and open a path to it. Yun men 1,000 years ago wanted us to awake, not remain trapped by signs and wonders. Yet even such a deconstructionist pointer can itself become a veil between us and what is real. The point is not reductive. It is not about ridding ourselves of poetry or of erasing thoughts or of cynically smashing beautiful legends. The miraculous imagery of the legend makes its own point. Zen adds, though, it is a point to be realized, personally awoken to, not simply thought about or clung to as a belief. Myth is a language that suggests vast realities. It has been downgraded in current vernacular to often mean untruth, due to a half-baked understanding that myth is not literal. Of course it's not. But that doesn't mean it's false. That is a failure to understand that, regarded properly, myth leads to the door that Zen practice opens, and it expresses something of what's seen once you pass through. All our Dharma ancestors, men and women, who were troubled by impermanence and injustice, and yet had faith that there was something more, something beyond. The intellect and senses encourage us to keep going. The way extends endlessly. Even Shakyamuni, the fully realized Buddha, Buddhist tradition says, is only halfway there. Yasutani Roshi puts this in a dramatic context in the three pillars of Zen by stating that we fancy ourselves, we humans, we fancy ourselves to be the crown of creation. Yet in the Buddhist view, we're only halfway between an amoeba and a full Buddha. Yunmen's response was his unique way of honoring the Buddha, his way of making sure that we would honor the Buddha with practice realization, not mere belief. His words are an antidote to fundamentalism. Yet to imitate Yunmen's iconoclastic Zen will lead us astray. Mere harsh words, shouts and blows are not Zen, but imitated become Zen slobber. Imitated, they become poison. In our little ceremony today, which everyone is welcome to come to, even if you're not coming to the entire Zazenkai today, in our ceremony, we will honor the Buddha tenderly and traditionally, with respect for the mythic import of his legend. Raising a spoon of sweet tea, we'll pour it over our baby Buddha, repeating the action of the birth-attending gods, the shining devas 2,500 years ago. It has another purpose as well. It's washing the baby Buddha, we wash our own minds clear of greed, anger, and ignorance. This too is how a baby Buddha gets born. In 2016, when Rose and I, along with Sunyana Roshi and her students, visited Ensuji, the training temple of the wonderful Zen poet and priest, Ryokan, his dates are 758 to 1831, we found they had a baby Buddha with one hand raised to the heavens, one pointed down to the earth, standing on the altar. Though we saw Buddhas in Japan that were big as a house, glorious and golden, at Ryokan's place, the baby Buddha was about the same size as ours here, which you see on the altar today. If we can bring the camera close enough, that is, it's pretty small. Ours is about 6 or 8 inches of carved wood. The baby Buddha at Ryokan's training place was even less impressive. It was about the same size, 6 or 8 inches, but was cast in dull black metal. It was humble, quite touching to see. And instead of those huge golden Buddhas, it stands out to me as one of the highlights of our pilgrimage. Practice realization is how a Buddha is born. The story of the Buddha's birth might be based on history or not. Regardless, it is also a metaphor of our own potential. This count, this breath, this koan can be our entrance into the Lumbini gardens of the living earth. Baby Buddha's awake. Rejoice. We'll stop here and recite our great vows for all.